Have you ever felt the suffocating weight of being forced back to square one? That's where my story begins. After a crushing breakup, I found myself moving back in with my parents. We lived in a quiet, rural town in western Massachusetts, a place where the silence almost felt louder than any bustling city street. It wasn't my choice, and it definitely wasn't my dream. But when life pulls the rug out from under you, sometimes you just have to land where you can. Living there felt like being stuck in quicksand. The town was lifeless compared to Boston, where I had spent the last couple of years. Out here, there were no vibrant city lights, no hum of excitement, just long stretches of empty roads and the occasional cricket chirping to remind you how isolated you were. It wasn't a place for someone like me, young, restless, and craving a fresh start. Every day felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the chance to leave again. To keep myself busy, I went back to my old job at the urgent care facility. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The only downside: overnight shifts. Working through the dead of night messed up more than just my sleep schedule. It pulled me further into this strange, lonely rhythm where most of the world was asleep, and I was wide awake, stuck in a cycle I desperately wanted to escape. This was my new normal. Temporary, I told myself. But even in the safety of my parents' home, something was coming. Something I never expected. And it started with an ordinary stop for gas. Stopping for gas at odd hours feels different, doesn't it? The world is quiet, almost too quiet, and even the smallest sound can set your nerves on edge. That's exactly how it felt when I pulled into the Shell station that morning. The parking lot was nearly empty, as usual, and the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. I went inside to pay with cash, hoping to save a little money. When I came back out to start fueling, I noticed a blue sedan had pulled up to another pump. At first, it seemed like nothing, just another late-night customer. A man stepped out of the sedan, tall and ordinary looking, but something about him didn't sit right. He fiddled with the gas pump, locked it in place, and then, without warning, walked straight toward me. I didn't know what to do. He stopped in front of me, smiled in this strange way, and said, "Want to see a funny trick?" I didn't want to talk to him, but something in my gut told me not to upset him either. So, I forced a fake laugh when he started doing some silly hand trick, pretending to pull his finger off. It wasn't funny, and it definitely wasn't normal. I looked away, hoping he'd get the hint, but he didn't. He just kept doing it, like he was waiting for something. When my gas tank finally clicked full, I felt a wave of relief. I quickly latched the nozzle back, grabbed my receipt, and hurried inside to get my change. By the time I came back out, the man was gone, but his car was still there. Something about that made my skin crawl. I didn't want to hang around and find out where he went. As I got into my car, paranoia took over. I checked the back seat just to be sure. Nothing. Still, I locked the doors and drove off. The whole time, my eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, scanning the empty road behind me. I didn't see any headlights, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me all the way home. Something about that encounter felt wrong, but I convinced myself it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I felt a little more at ease. Home. Safe. Or so I thought. I grabbed the spare key from its usual hiding spot, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. Quietly, I returned the key to its place, locked the door behind me, and headed straight to the kitchen with my food. It was late or early, depending on how you see it, and all I wanted was to eat in peace and forget about the strange man from the gas station. The house was still, the kind of silence you only get in the middle of the night. My parents were asleep upstairs, so I kept things quiet as I sat down to eat. But just as I started, I heard it a faint sound, the front door unlocking. Then, the soft creak of it opening and closing. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I called out, "Mom, Dad." No response. I sat there, paralyzed, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. My parents weren't awake, and no one else should have been in the house. I slowly stood up, every step towards the foyer feeling heavier than the last. When I peeked around the corner, the space was empty. No one was there. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. I ran upstairs and burst into my parents' room, startling them awake. In a quiet but panicked voice, I told them what I heard. My dad shot out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and headed downstairs. My mom and I followed close behind, clutching each other as he checked every corner of the house. Then he stepped outside to check the key's hiding spot. It was gone. That's when reality hit us. Someone had taken the key. Someone had been inside the house, and it wasn't over yet. The fear in the house was palpable. My dad, determined to protect us, continued searching every room. My mom and I followed him closely, clutching each other for comfort. He checked under beds, behind doors, in closets, everywhere someone could hide. Each empty room brought a small sense of relief, but it wasn't enough to shake the dread hanging over us. When he finished searching my older brother's old room, I lingered behind. Something didn't feel right. Call it instinct or paranoia, but I decided to check the spots my dad might have missed. First, under the bed, nothing. Then the closet, also empty. I tried to convince myself I was being overly cautious, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. I went downstairs, planning to stick close to my mom while my dad continued his search. But curiosity got the better of me. Something told me to check the dining room, right near the front door. I dropped to my knees and looked under the table. And there he was, the man from the gas station, crouched under the dining table, staring back at me. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, instinct took over, and I screamed. My scream startled my mom, who began yelling too. My dad came running from another part of the house, ready to fight. The man scrambled out from under the table, and the chaos that followed was nothing short of terrifying. My dad, despite his age, grappled with the man, refusing to let go. My mom and I joined in, hitting and grabbing at him, doing whatever we could to help. Eventually, overwhelmed by all three of us, the man broke free and bolted out the front door. My dad, out of breath but still full of adrenaline, locked the door behind him while my mom and I called the police. We thought the nightmare was over, but he still had the spare key. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights cutting through the dark night. We explained everything: the spare key, the break-in, the fight. They took our statements and assured us they'd keep a patrol car parked outside the house for the night. It helped, but only a little. Knowing the man still had the key to our front door was enough to keep my mom and me wide awake. My dad, always the protector, wasn't taking any chances. He wedged a chair under the front door handle and insisted on sleeping in the living room, ready to jump into action if anything happened. It was a tense and restless night for all of us. Every creak of the house made us jump. Every shadow outside felt like a threat. The next morning, my dad wasted no time. He replaced the lock on the front door himself, making sure the man couldn't use the stolen key to get back in. My parents also decided never to hide a spare key outside again. It was a hard lesson learned, but at least we felt a little safer. I couldn't shake the guilt, though. I had led that man to my family's home, even if I hadn't meant to. I replayed the night over and over in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. But no matter how much I blamed myself, one thing was clear: I needed to get out of there. Staying in that house, in that town, no longer felt like an option. The sense of safety I once had there was gone. All I wanted now was to leave and start over somewhere far away from this nightmare. As days passed, the fear started to fade, but the memory of that man never left me. I kept wondering how he had managed to follow me so easily. The ride home that night had seemed so normal, so uneventful. But then it hit me: he must have followed me with his headlights off. It made sense now. The empty road, the eerie silence, and how I didn't notice anyone behind me the entire way home. He had planned it. From the moment he saw me at the gas station, he must have decided to follow me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I felt sick knowing how close my family had come to being seriously hurt or worse because of my carelessness. I had to move smarter, stay more aware. But most of all, I had to leave. Living in that house wasn't just uncomfortable anymore, it felt dangerous. I needed a fresh start, away from the town, away from the memories, and far away from anyone who might still be watching. It wasn't just about wanting a new place to live, it was about reclaiming my sense of safety. I didn't know where I'd go or how soon I could leave, but one thing was certain: I wasn't staying there a second longer than I had to. The thought of leaving gave me a small sense of relief, but it wasn't something I could do right away. In the meantime, I tried to adjust, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every noise, every shadow outside the window made me jump. Even driving at night, a simple routine I used to enjoy, felt like a gamble. But I still had to work. Overnight shifts at the urgent care kept my schedule upside down, and driving home in the early hours of the morning became a dreaded routine. Each time I left work, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd double-check the back seat of my car and keep a close eye on my mirrors, but it never felt like enough. The fear had crept into every part of my life, and the quiet, empty streets of the town didn't help. There were no neighbors to see or hear anything if something happened. The isolation, once just annoying, now felt like a trap. I wasn't just waiting for the chance to leave anymore. I was counting down the days. Every moment in that house, in that town, was a reminder of what had happened, and I couldn't live like that any longer. I started making plans to move out as quickly as possible. I couldn't wait to leave the constant fear behind. But until then, I took every precaution I could. I stopped using the spare key, kept all the doors locked, and checked every room before going to bed. My parents tried to act like everything was back to normal, but I could tell they were just as shaken as I was. The nights were the hardest. Every creak in the house made my heart race. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that night in my head. The image of that man under the table was burned into my memory. No matter how much I tried to convince myself we were safe now, the feeling never really went away. Work became my escape. Even with the late night shifts, it felt better to be out of the house. At least at work, I was surrounded by people. But the drive home was always nerve-wracking. I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, worried that someone might be following me again. Every day felt like a battle to hold on to some sense of normalcy. I knew leaving was the only way to truly move on, but until then, all I could do was keep my guard up and hope that nothing else would happen. There's something about the open road that feels both freeing and dangerous. I've always preferred driving overnight, avoiding the chaos of traffic and the endless stoplights. It was the early hours of the morning, around 2 a.m., when I decided to leave New York for Florida. The roads were quiet, and I was ready to make the long journey. I stopped by Dunkin' Donuts to grab my coffee, knowing I had a long drive ahead. As the sun remained hidden, I settled into my car, feeling the cool night air as I drove out of the city. I'd been on the road for a couple of hours when I finally started to feel the hunger creeping in. My stomach growled, and I looked for a place to stop. Just ahead, I saw the sign for Wendy's. It was the perfect place to grab a quick breakfast. I pulled off the highway, relieved to find somewhere open this early. But when I pulled into the parking lot, something wasn't right. The lights were on, but the menu wasn't lit up, and the intercom was silent. I waited a minute, thinking maybe they were just getting ready to open. But when no one greeted me, I decided to check my phone. That's when I saw it. Wendy's didn't open until 6 a.m. I was about to leave, disappointed, when I noticed a car parked in the lot. It was odd because there weren't any other cars around, especially at this hour. My instincts told me to just drive away, but something made me stay. Little did I know, this simple stop was about to turn into a nightmare. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty parking lot, unsure of what to do. That's when I saw him, a man walking toward my car. He looked ordinary enough, but something about the way he approached made my stomach twist. He stopped right by my window and smiled, motioning for me to roll it down. I hesitated, but then he spoke. "Hey, my car's battery died. Can you help me jumpstart it?" I looked over at the car he was pointing to. It was parked far from the building, tucked away in a dark corner. He seemed harmless enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, I didn't want to be rude, so I cracked my window just enough to hear him better. He told me he had jumper cables in his trunk, and all I had to do was pull up next to him. It felt like an odd request, but I agreed, thinking maybe I was just overthinking it. I backed up my car and positioned it next to his, popping the hood. He went around to his car and did the same. We connected the cables, and I waited for a few minutes, expecting his car to start. But nothing happened. He tried again and again, but the car wouldn't turn over. Something felt wrong. I stood there, watching him closely, feeling the tension grow. It was as if I could feel the trap closing around me. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening, the man walked away and pulled out his phone. He started talking quietly in Spanish, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. It only added to the unease creeping up my spine. Something didn't sit right. Why was he acting so strangely? I glanced around, trying to stay calm, but that's when I heard the roar of engines. Two pickup trucks sped into the parking lot, one from either side of the building. My heart dropped. I realized instantly what was happening. The man hadn't been stranded, this was a setup. Before I could even react, the trucks blocked me in. I was trapped. The man's smile turned into something darker, more threatening. He stepped closer, his eyes colder than before. My mind raced. I had to get out of there. I locked my doors, my heart hammering in my chest. I could feel the danger closing in. Without thinking, I slammed my car into reverse and sped toward the edge of the lot. But I wasn't safe yet. I could hear the men shouting as I sped off, but I didn't dare look back. I had one goal: to get out of there before they caught me. I didn't stop to catch my breath until I was deep into the woods, far from the parking lot. The adrenaline had taken over, and I ran as fast as I could, stumbling through the underbrush, cutting up my legs on sharp branches and rocks. My mind was racing, but I knew I couldn't stop. I could hear them calling out in the distance, their voices in Spanish growing louder as they searched for me. I ducked low, trying to keep as quiet as possible, hoping they wouldn't find me. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it might give me away. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath, praying they would leave. After what felt like forever, the voices began to fade. Slowly, the sound of their footsteps grew distant, and I finally allowed myself to breathe again. But even with the danger passing, I couldn't shake the fear. I had no idea how many of them there were or if they were armed. I didn't know if they were still out there or if they'd gone, but I wasn't taking any chances. I stayed hidden until I was sure it was safe. Finally, I made my way back to the parking lot, my legs shaking with every step. When I reached my car, I saw it from a distance. It was the worst sight I could imagine, my rear window shattered. Panic surged through me as I ran up to the car, checking the inside. My worst fears were true. Everything I owned, my clothes, my shoes, my suitcase gone. I felt a wave of shock hit me as I stood there, staring at the mess. My heart sank, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My things, my life, all stolen in a matter of minutes. I felt sick to my stomach. The car was a mess, the glass from the shattered window crunching underfoot. I couldn't understand how this had happened so quickly. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and dialed the police. I explained everything: how I'd been ambushed, how I ran into the woods to hide, and how now my stuff was gone. They told me they'd send someone out to take a report, but it didn't feel like enough. The damage was done, and no amount of paperwork was going to bring my things back. The officers arrived, took down my information, and promised they'd look at the CCTV footage from Wendy's once it opened. But as they spoke, I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. The vehicles had fake plates, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy to solve. I could tell they were trying to give me some hope, but deep down, I knew it was a long shot. I didn't want to stay there anymore. It felt like every minute I spent in that parking lot made it worse. I called my insurance, filed the report, and got back in my car. The drive home was the hardest part, 2 hours of pure stress and frustration. What had started as a simple trip now felt like a nightmare I couldn't shake off. The drive back was a blur of frustration and disbelief. Every mile felt longer than the last, and I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had lost. It wasn't just the clothes, the shoes, or the suitcase. It was the feeling of being completely violated, of having something so personal taken from me without warning. When I finally got home, I just sat there for a moment, staring at the empty road in front of me. I couldn't shake the image of the men, or the cold, empty feeling that had settled in my chest. The police might have promised to look into it, but I knew better. With fake plates and no real leads, I wasn't expecting anything. I tried to tell myself that things would get better, that I could move past this. But the reality was that I couldn't let go of the fear. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone, like the world had turned on me in a way I couldn't explain. I kept hoping for some kind of justice, but deep down, I knew that the people who did this were long gone, and I was left with nothing but the wreckage. All I could do now was wait. Wait for the police to call. Wait for the feeling of safety to return. But mostly, wait for some kind of closure that I knew would never come. The worst part was that feeling of helplessness. I couldn't control what had happened, and I couldn't undo it. My things were gone, and nothing would bring them back. But more than that, I realized how easy it was for people to take advantage of someone trying to do the right thing. I thought I was helping, but I was only making myself a target. I kept thinking about the man's smile, how it shifted from friendly to menacing. I didn't know if he had planned everything from the start or if he was just lucky that night. Either way, I had no choice but to accept that I'd been part of something much bigger than I understood at the time. As much as I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't. I hoped that karma would catch up to them, that somehow they would get what was coming to them. It was the only thing that gave me any peace. I knew I couldn't let this define me, but it was hard not to feel bitter. No matter what, I learned a lesson the hard way. Trusting people even for a moment could be dangerous. And in the end, I was left with nothing but the hope that those responsible would face the consequences of their actions. It's strange how quickly your view of the world can change. Before all of this, I never gave a second thought to helping someone in need. I'd stop for anyone if they asked for help, believing people were generally good. But after everything that happened, I couldn't help but question everything. The road trip that was supposed to be a simple, quiet drive turned into a nightmare that I'd never forget. It made me more cautious, more aware of what's going on around me, and less trusting of strangers. I'd learned it the hard way that there are risks in even the smallest decisions, and sometimes doing the right thing can backfire. I may never get my things back, but I can't let that loss consume me. Life goes on, and so do I. It's the only thing I can do. But the next time I hit the road, I'll be looking over my shoulder, a little more aware of the world I once thought I understood. It's easy to forget how long a 15-hour drive can feel when you're alone, especially when the road stretches on, seemingly endless, and the world outside your car is nothing but darkness. That night, I had been driving for hours, hoping to push through the worst of it. I didn't want to stop, but my eyes were heavy and my body felt drained. The miles were beginning to blur together, and all I could think about was finding somewhere to rest. I had a few more hours left before I'd be anywhere near my destination, but fatigue was catching up with me. The road seemed empty, and there were no signs of life, just the faint hum of my car engine and the occasional flicker of my headlights. I needed to stop. When I saw the rest area sign, I didn't hesitate. I pulled off the highway, relieved to find somewhere I could stretch my legs. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no trucks, no signs of other travelers, just an old building and a single car parked far away from everything else. I didn't think much of it, though. It was just a quick pit stop before I got back on the road. Or so I thought. I stepped out of my car, the cold night air hitting me as I looked around. The rest area was small, just a simple restroom building, and the only car in the lot was parked off to the side. I didn't think much of it as I headed toward the bathroom. As soon as I walked inside, something felt off. There was a man standing in the far corner, facing the wall. It was strange because he wasn't using the urinal or a stall. He was just standing there, motionless. I paused, unsure of what to do. I almost turned back, but then I figured he was just some guy minding his business. I tried to ignore him, focusing on getting to a stall. But as I walked past him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I quickly finished what I came for, but when I turned to leave, the man turned around. His face blank and expressionless stared at me, sending a chill down my spine. I didn't wait another second. I hurried out of the bathroom, hoping I was just being paranoid. But that feeling of unease lingered, growing stronger as I made my way back to my car. I rushed back to my car, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled in my stomach. As I was about to get in, I looked up and saw him. The man was walking straight toward my car, his eyes locked on me. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly got into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I was already on edge from the bathroom encounter, and now I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. I didn't want to stick around to find out what he was doing, so I drove off as fast as I could, glancing at my rearview mirror. Thankfully, the road was clear. But as I drove, I kept seeing flashes of his figure in the mirror, walking toward my car. and it felt like he was still watching me. My hands tightened on the wheel as I tried to push the thought from my mind. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and overthinking things. But the unease didn't leave. When I finally saw another rest area up ahead, I thought maybe I could get some peace. Maybe it was just a bad moment. Maybe. I pulled into the next rest area, hoping it would be different, quieter, safer. The lot was empty, and for a moment, I felt relieved. I parked right by the bathroom and quickly headed inside, eager to put the weird encounter behind me. The bathroom was silent, just the hum of the lights overhead. I went straight to a stall, hoping for a quick break. But just as I started to feel a little more at ease, I heard footsteps. They didn't stop at the urinals like they should have. The footsteps came straight toward my stall and stopped. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest as I glanced down at the shoes under the door. I couldn't see much, but I knew someone was standing there, just outside. My mind raced. Was it the same man? Was I being followed? I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I finally spoke up, my voice shaky. "Someone's in here." No response. The silence stretched on, and I felt my fear grow. I knew I had to do something fast. I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing, and I felt trapped in that small store. I quickly reached for my phone and dialed 911, putting it on speaker so the person outside could hear the operator's voice. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I spoke clearly, trying to stay calm. I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened. There was no response from outside, but I could hear the person still standing there. My stomach turned as the silence dragged on. I kept my voice steady, explaining where I was and what had happened. I wasn't sure if the man would stay or leave, but I knew I couldn't take any chances. A few moments later, I heard the footsteps move away from the stall. I waited, holding my breath. The tension only eased when a knock at the bathroom door came from a police officer. I was finally safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The officer checked the area, confirmed the man was gone, and made sure I was okay. I left the bathroom, still shaken, knowing the nightmare wasn't over, but for now, I was safe. As the officer escorted me out, I still couldn't fully relax. My mind was racing, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The man had followed me from the first rest area to the second, and I had no idea how long he'd been watching me. The police officer made sure everything was clear, and I double-checked my car to make sure it hadn't been tampered with. Thankfully, it was fine. But the relief was short-lived. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't truly safe just yet. I thanked the officer and got back in my car, but I couldn't bring myself to drive away just yet. I had to calm down, had to be sure that nothing else was going to happen. The night had already taken a terrifying turn, and I wasn't sure if it was over. I finally started the engine, glanced around one last time, and drove off. The rest of my trip went on as normal, but that feeling, that sense of being followed, of not being alone, stayed with me long after I left the rest area behind. Even though I was finally back on the road, the fear didn't fade. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, just like before. The road stretched ahead, but my mind kept replaying what had happened at the rest areas. I couldn't shake the image of that man standing outside the store, his silence growing more unsettling with every passing second. I kept driving, but every mile felt heavier. What if he had been following me the whole time? What if I wasn't safe, even now? It was hard to ignore the creeping doubt, the feeling that I was being watched. As I got closer to my destination, I tried to push the thoughts away. I had to focus on the road, on getting through the trip. But deep down, I knew this experience would stick with me forever. The fear, the uncertainty, it would always be a part of me. And I'd never look at a simple rest stop the same way again. The experience had changed something in me. Before, I had never thought twice about stopping at a rest area or trusting people I didn't know. Now, every small interaction felt like a potential threat. The feeling of being followed had stuck with me, lingering long after I left those rest areas behind. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just one strange encounter, but the fear was still there. I couldn't help but wonder if I had been too trusting, too careless. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but it felt like more than that. Now, whenever I see a rest stop in the distance, my heart races. I've learned to be more aware of my surroundings, to trust my instincts. I never thought something like this could happen to me, but it did, and it left me with a deep, unsettling truth. Not everyone is who they seem, and sometimes the danger is closer than you think.